Building a computer is actually extremely easy, despite what you may have been told. The hardest part of building a PC is selecting the correct parts to match the purpose of your build and, of course, your budget. This build here is actually for a good friend of mine who is building a retro gaming emulator complete with a full arcade cabinet, but we'll dive into that more in future videos, but for now we'll just discuss the simple build process. What we decided to go with was a simple build to get the job done at a low cost. For the CPU, we decided to go with the Intel Pentium G4400. It's a dual-core GPU because that's all that's really needed for an arcade emulator build. For the motherboard, we went with a ASRock H110M-HDS. It is a micro ATX form factor, and we simply went with this one because of the price and it got great reviews. It will support USB 2.0 and 3.0 as well as 2 RAM slots for DDR4. It supports the 1151 socket. For the RAM, we went for the budget-friendly Crucial 8GB DDR4 kit. This is a very basic 2x4GB kit with basic PCB and no super cool heat spreader. It will get the job done though. My friend had his old GTX 760 laying around, so we are using that. 2 GB of VRAM will be plenty for what we're using this build for. As for the power supply, we decided on an EVGA 500 watt budget model. It's 80+ certified and the price was right, as well as meeting the power requirements that we needed. For storage, we went with a Western Digital 4TB blue drive. This will be ample space for any and all games that my friend desires. The case being used is my buddy's old Rosewill case from his first build. It's a decent chassis and will get the job done. Plus we already had it, so that saves some pennies. Now let's get on to the build process. First, you want to start off with the motherboard. I usually sit it on the box to add the CPU and RAM. Insert the CPU first, making sure that you line up the arrow markings on the CPU with the motherboard. Just push the bar down to open the socket and insert the CPU and push the bar back down to lock it in place. It does take a good amount of force, so don't be afraid to give it a little muscle. It won't break, I promise. Next, I usually insert the RAM sticks. There's only one way they can go in. There's a small notch cut out where the pins are that line it up for you. Just make sure you insert the RAM all the way so it is seated properly. Next, I go ahead and put the factory cooler on the CPU. Most CPUs come with a stock cooler, and they are extremely simple to install. Just line up the cooler and push the fasteners through the holes in the motherboard, and push it until it clicks. If you decided on an aftermarket cooler, be sure to follow the instructions provided with your cooler. Now at this point, I will sometimes go ahead and install the GPU and hook up the power supply up to the motherboard and boot it up while connected to a monitor just to make sure that it will even post before I proceed. But I chose not to do that on this build. Hopefully it doesn't bite me later. So what we will do is go ahead and install the motherboard into the case. Make sure you install the I/O shield into the case, ensuring that it is installed correctly and not upside down. Be sure to install the standoffs in the correct area for your board. Cases should have markings for the different board types like micro ATX and ATX, so you know where to install them. Because we're using the micro ATX board for this build, I installed the standoffs in those locations. Once the standoffs are installed, line the motherboard up and secure it with the provided screws. Next step in the process would be to install the GPU. We will use a PCIe 2.0 x16 slot for the GPU. Just line the GPU up with the socket and be sure to seat it fully into the slot. If you're using a new case, you will need to remove the expansion slot covers on the back of the case. As for the storage drive, you just need to mount it in the proper location for the drive type. 3.5-inch drives will mount in different location than a 2.5-inch drive or SSD depending on your case. Ours had a sliding bracket. I simply installed it toolless and slid it in. Now we will install the power supply into the case. Some newer or higher end cases have brackets that need to be mounted to the power supply first, and then the bracket mounts to the case. So your mileage may vary. Now that everything is installed, we can start with running the cabling. Some cases have better cable management than others. Just do the best you can to make it look nice and clean, and try not to restrict airflow in the case. This case was originally set up for a regular ATX, so I had to remap a lot of the wiring, but it didn't look too bad. After you finish wrapping up the cabling, you are now complete with your build. It is now time to hook up your peripherals, your monitor, and boot the computer up and install your OS of choice, which can be a whole nother video on its own. So there you have it. Now you should be able to build a PC on your own now and enjoy your hard work. Thanks for watching. Please like the video if this helped you out, and subscribe for future videos. If you'd like me to do a video on installing Windows, let me know. Later.